consistent with the underlying worldview that we profess. In examining a particular person's worldview, it's important to watch for arbitrariness, mere personal opinions, or unfounded prejudicial conjecture. For example, saying that we shouldn't eat babies because that would mean the end of the human race. So what? From an atheistic perspective, we're stardust. You're assuming what you have not proven. It's arbitrary. And watch for inconsistency. Is the person acting consistently with their platform or worldview that they say they're standing on? Is one side forced to abandon their platform or worldview in an attempt to borrow truths and concepts from the others that do not comport with their own professed view of the world? Let's start with the biblical worldview. The biblical worldview fundamentally says that God, who declares the end from the beginning, who is the sovereign in the heavens above and on the earth below, and does according to his will in the heavens above and the earth below, that God, the eternal God, from eternity into eternity, the first, the last, that God, who is all-powerful, all-knowing, just, and love, has revealed himself in creation, conscience, and specifically in the person of his Son. God has spoken. We have a revelational epistemology. We can know what we know because fundamentally God has talked to us. Bruce was wondering a moment ago about how can people be sure that we know what's going on in his head. Well, the biblical claim is that God is all-powerful, all-knowing. He created all of us, including Bruce, and knows what he's thinking. A definition of God. Question 4 of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. This is for all of my Presby brosifs, Reformed Baptists here, to show solidarity. Question 4 of the Westminster Confession. God is spirit, is a spirit infinite, eternal, and unchangeable in his being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. Our argument this evening to our esteemed opponents is that the existence of the triune God and his attributes are the necessary precondition for intelligible experience. Apart from him, human value and dignity is an illusion. Laws of logic are not necessary and unchanging, and science is rendered useless apart from God. Our argument this evening is that apart from the triune God revealed in the Scriptures, you cannot provide a meaningful justification for claims to knowledge. You cannot prove anything, nor can you provide the preconditions necessary for all that we take for granted. The uniformity in nature, laws of logic and ethics. That is to say, we are arguing transcendentally. We are arguing, to quote Dr. Bonson, from the impossibility of the contrary. In my opening, I'd like to direct your attention to 3 specific points of contact to demonstrate that apart from the Christian God, you cannot know or prove anything. Number 1, the uniformity in nature. From a biblical perspective, God is all-powerful. God is sovereign. He upholds all things by the word of his power. Hebrews chapter 1. Specifically, we have revelation from God, contact with God. The jailer has stepped down into time, though we're chained to the wall. He has stepped down and touched us. He has told us that he carries the universe along to its intended destination. Christians have a meaningful warrant or justification to appeal to the principle of induction. Now, my friends, both atheist and Christian alike this evening, please pay close attention to this, because everything that we're doing tonight, including what you're appealing to right now, depends upon this central point. The principle of induction, in popular parlance, the uniformity in nature, that the future will be like the past. All inference, all science, all language is based upon, fundamentally, the uniformity in nature, and that future experience will be congruent with past experience. And by the way, this is not a trick. Bertrand Russell, one of the most famous atheists in history, who wrote the book, Why I'm Not a Christian, also wrote a book in 1812 called, or 1912, I forget, sorry, Problems of Philosophy. He brought up the issue of induction in his book and demonstrated that you must provide a meaningful justification for the uniformity in nature, and you cannot appeal to past experience to do so. In other words, here's the question. in the uniformity in nature, how do our atheist friends who believe we live in a naturalistic, materialist universe provide a meaningful justification for science and logic that the future will be like the past, that the next 5 seconds will be like the past? And appealing to past experience, according to Bertrand Russell, one of the most famous atheists in history, is circular. It does not provide a meaningful justification. Christians can provide the preconditions for intelligibility as to why we can do science and how we can do science. Second point, laws of logic. Fundamentally, in the Christian worldview, we know that God is spirit. God is immaterial and unchanging. He is eternal. To engage in contradiction is to engage in the nature of lying. God, the scriptures say, cannot lie. To contradict yourself is to lie about what is true and about reality. Christians, listen closely, have a justification as to why we can appeal and how we can appeal to universal, unchanging, that's invariant, necessary laws of logic. We have the preconditions in the worldview that can make sense of that, and we have an answer for the moral requirement to be honest and have integrity when discussing proof or reason. Laws of logic, based in the very character of God. God cannot lie. God's thinking is consistent and rational. Our thinking is to be a reflection of His thinking. As His image, we are supposed to be like Him. God is not the author of confusion. Number 3, ethics. And this was assumed a moment ago. From a biblical worldview, we can have human value and dignity at the bottom of our system because all people, including atheists, are image of God and have value and meaning because they reflect the infinite value and goodness of the Creator. Human beings, all human beings have value and dignity and worth by nature of being image of God. God has spoken. He says, love your neighbor. That is to say, as Christians, we actually have a basis to say we ought to, morally ought to, love our neighbor rather than eat our neighbor. From an atheistic perspective, standing on their worldview, they have no justification as to why we ought to love our neighbor rather than eat our neighbor. God is love. Love does no harm to its neighbor. We are image of God. Jesus says all the law and the prophets are based upon love for God, love for neighbor. Why do we not steal? We love our neighbor and we love God. Why do we not murder? Because we love God and love our neighbor. Love does no harm to its neighbor. We are image of God. The atheist claims the Bible is contradictory. Well, from an atheist perspective, so what? Our ancestors were fish. Religion is based on superstition. So what? Descendants of bacteria aren't obligated to worry about graduate school. Professed Christians have done evil things in history. From an atheistic perspective, so what? What African apes do to each other is morally irrelevant. There is evil and suffering in the world. So what? Richard Dawkins said, the universe as it exists displays there really is no good, no evil. There is only blind and pitiless indifference. Only blind and pitiless indifference. Dr. Will Provine, professor of biology at Cornell University, says that there is no immanent morality. Do you know what that means? It's an illusion. He says there's no human free will. We live, we die, and we're gone. We're absolutely gone when we die. That, my friends, is an honest atheist, although he doesn't have to be. Because from an atheistic perspective, there is no foundation to provide the necessary preconditions for integrity in debate. Atheists claim the Bible is full of evil. Well, brothers and sisters, friends, tonight, are you ready? So what? So what? Nothing is ultimately evil in an atheistic worldview. We're just doing what stardust does in a godless universe under these conditions. I want you, please, to tonight ask the question over and over and over to each side, both the Christians and the atheists. I want you to ask this very simple question. Are you ready? So what? When claims are made, if so what is a philosophically devastating critique of your worldview, it is not a worldview you should hold on to any longer. In honor of Dr. Bahnsen, he said in his debate with Edward Tabash, the atheist is satisfied to ignore the need for intellectual justification and explanation, the need to gain consistency within his total beliefs, and the need to demonstrate systematic cogency in his overall perspective on the world, man, and values. In this light, atheism, for all its proud boast of scholarly adequacy, is a kind of intellectual adolescence which refuses to think hard, face the facts, and be tough-minded. Atheists live, when all is said and done, by blind and contradictory faith about how we know what we know and what the nature of reality is. Atheism is arbitrary and irrational, all the while dressing up in the costume of rationality. Atheism, philosophically speaking, is much closer to superstition, undisciplined reflection, and wishful thinking than to science. That was my shout out to Bahnsen. 3 things I want to humbly present to you tonight. The claim is not, listen closely, the claim tonight is not that atheists don't do science, don't appeal to logic, and don't have an ethical system. The claim is that they cannot account or justify any of those things. Saying something doesn't justify it. You must provide the preconditions necessary to make that claim intelligible. If you're going to claim science, you have to be able to justify meaningfully how that is possible in a godless universe. If we live in a universe that is not governed by God and is ultimately without cosmic purpose, it is devolved down to time and chance acting on matter. And you do not have a justification or an answer for David Hume, the Scottish skeptic on induction, nor for Bertrand Russell. Saying, well, it always has been in the past, is, philosophically speaking, adolescent. Number 2, our challenge is that God is the necessary precondition to make sense of human experience. That apart from Him, you cannot prove anything, and that we can prove God from the existence of the contrary. I want you to think tonight, if you would, with me. This is for Christians and for atheists. I love, by the way, as atheists, you're my favorite. But I'd like you to do this tonight. Would you test our claims? We have already professed before you that we are standing on a particular view of the world. To come here tonight and to give us a perspective of the world and then claim that that's in fact not a perspective of the world is not helpful in a debate. I'd like you, if you would, to imagine for a moment that we are standing on 2 stages. And underneath us is what we profess to believe about the world. Now, if you would tonight, I'd like you to look at what comes out of our mouths. I want you to think about what comes out of our mouths and ask this question. Besides, so what? I'd like you to ask the question, is what's coming out of their mouth consistent with what they say about the world? And the third thing I'd like you to know tonight is that there is hope in Jesus Christ. Listen, this is not a mere intellectual game. This is the stuff of life. This is whether or not we have a meaningful foundation to tell people that science is an important enterprise, that science is necessary, that laws of logic are universal and unchanging, and they are necessary. This is about the stuff of life. This is about meaningful human experience. This is not merely an intellectual game or gymnastics. And in the end, this is very much about what life is all about. God is who He says He is, and He is a necessary precondition for this entire debate tonight. I would say our atheist friends have violated their own professed beliefs about the world by showing up. Because if atheism were true, we wouldn't have any meaningful justification for all that we're appealing to tonight. Uniformity in nature, laws of logic, and absolute standards of ethics. But in the end, here's what's most important. God became a man in the person of Christ, lived a righteous and sinless life, died for sinners, and rose from the dead. not merely to save you for heaven one day, but to save all of you now, to reconcile you to himself now. And he doesn't just reconcile you to himself and bring you to peace through the cross, he also saves your mind.
At this time, the atheist will have 10 minutes to cross-examine. Remember that any of the 3 respondents can respond to a question.
Thank you very much, Jeff.